Welcome to the Powell-Liberty Historical Society March 2022 program. To keep everyone safe during this COVID pandemic we're living in, this program is being pre-recorded and will be streamed at our regularly scheduled time on March 14th at 7 p.m. And thereafter, it'll be available on our website under the video library. And the website is powellhistory.org. We're happy to have with us today Dr. Michael Kreger, Vice President of Conservation and Sustainability at the Columbus Zoo and the Aquarium. He'll present the history of the zoo, which is no doubt a gem in our own backyard. Currently, Dr. Kreger works with all the departments at the zoo, including Safari Golf and the Wilds, to develop and promote programs that save animals worldwide. He serves on many zoo and wildlife-related committees. Before joining the zoo, he had a 20-year career with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, FWS, Migratory Bird Program, and International Affairs. Prior to FWS, he worked for the Department of Agriculture for a time. Mike's academic background includes 3 degrees from the University of Maryland. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Conservation. His master's research focused on applied ethology and animal welfare in reptiles. And his doctorate research examined the effects of captive rearing methods on the survival of whooping cranes reintroduced in Central Florida. Between his studies, Mike even found time to be a Peace Corps volunteer in Honduras. Mike tells me he has always had a passion for zoos and zoo history. He's had several encyclopedia entries and scientific publications that include aspects of zoo history. His first zoo job was at the National Zoo. He was a 14-year-old volunteer at the time. As it approaches its 100th birthday, the zoo remains a beloved community asset that has global impact. Dr. Kreger will talk about where the Columbus Zoo has been and its progressive march to gaining an international reputation for excellence in animal care, conservation, and education. Welcome, Dr. Kreger.
And thank you for being here. And, I'm sorry we can't all be together for this talk, but as you watch this, I'll be in Nepal. And we have conservation programs with rhinos and tigers in 2 of the national parks in Nepal. So I'll be visiting there while you're watching this. Wow. I'm so excited to talk to you about the Columbus Zoo history today. We're approaching our 100th anniversary. And so we're a fairly young zoo compared to the other zoos in Ohio, like the Cleveland Zoo and the Cincinnati Zoo, big zoos that were formed around the early part of the century. So what I want to do today is talk about how we got from start in 1927 to where we are today in 2022. A lot of good things are coming, but we build on the shoulders of those who came before us. I do want to thank some of the zoo volunteers who've helped me collect material for this talk, and particularly our former librarian, Sheila Campbell. So, I've always loved zoos and the history of zoos, and I'm sure if you meet people at the Columbus Zoo or any other zoo, you'll find that they were inspired by visits they had to the zoo sometime in their childhood. And zoos have changed a lot since our childhoods. Early zoos in the United States grew out of menageries. And menageries were simply postage stamp collections of animals, curiosities that may not be organized in any scientific or geographic way. The first zoo to be considered a modern zoo was the Philadelphia Zoo, and they consider themselves the oldest zoological park in the United States because they're based on the London Zoo model. But you can see in this slide, 1875, here's the Cincinnati Zoo. Big, glorious buildings, that pay tribute to the community and the heritage of those immigrants who helped form those communities. Remember, at this time, there were a lot of people who came from Europe where zoos were big cultural institutions. And so the Cincinnati Zoo opened in 1875, Cleveland Zoo opened in 1882, Toledo in 1900. All of these zoos for glorious purposes, lofty goals like science and education. That wasn't the case in Columbus. And the Columbus Zoo wasn't the first zoo in Columbus. In fact, if you go to Clintonville, in 1905, a small zoo was established in what's now the Beachwold community on North High Street. And this zoo, called Zooland, was really a place for people to go and have a nice picnic, see some animals, play some games. There were lots of activities there, and stock was sold for it. They had deer, they had monkeys, they may have even had a tiger. And if you go to that community now, you'll see some remnants, like there are these two flagstone pylons that on either side of the street. It's located on High and West Beachwold. And there was actually a gate that was there at one time where you could enter the zoo. And one of the reasons, probably the reason why this facility was built, was to get people to start settling in the suburbs. That the city was becoming crowded and trolley lines were starting to go out into the suburbs. And isn't it great if you have a trolley line that can take you to these beautiful recreational facilities outside of the city? Unfortunately, the park lasted about 4 months, and it was sold off as parcels for real estate. And you can see in these pictures in the bottom, that's somebody's guest house. Back in the day, in 1905, that was considered either a monkey building or the maintenance shed for the animals at that zoo. And there's even an elephant weather vane on the top. So that was really the original Columbus Zoo. And I should say that even before then, there was a lot of wildlife, exotic wildlife in Columbus, because the Adam Forepaugh show, that circus, had its winter quarters in Columbus. And they had elephants and giraffes and all sorts of exotic species that would travel by rail during the season. There was another zoo that came after, and this was in Olentangy Park, which in its day, between 1910 and 1938, was the largest amusement park in the United States. People would come from all over to go here. And it was at the terminus of the trolley line that came out of the city. It's where Olentangy Village is now. It had monkeys, it had bears, it had elephants. You see a couple of kids on the elephant ride here. It had roller coasters. It had a carousel. And in fact, the only thing that's left of that park today is that carousel, which we have at the zoo now. It's near the water's edge area of the zoo and across from Okapi. So that's the Mangles Illions Grand Carousel that was built in 1914. Before it came to the zoo, it was actually moved to Gooding Amusement Park, which was built next to the zoo, which became Wyandotte Lake, or Wyandotte Amusement Park, which is now Zumbizi Bay. If you look at the city of Columbus in 1920, the population is 237,000 people. It's a boom town. And in fact, that population is roughly equivalent to the population of Delaware County right now. And even though at the time it was small compared to Cincinnati, which had over 470,000 people, or Cleveland, which had nearly 800,000 people, it was a growing cultural center. and there was interest in building a zoo. And so what happened was the city of Columbus buys 21.5 acres in Delaware County for the development of the O'Shaughnessy Reservoir and Dam for the creation of a park. Now, this dam was very important because there was a lot of flooding happening in the city of Columbus at the time. And there was a trip that was taken by Mayor James Thomas and the Evening Dispatch publisher Harry Wolff, or H.P. Wolff, and Clarence Hoover, who were, the three of them were working on this dam project. And they went to St. Louis to take a look at the water infrastructure of that city. While they were there, they heard about the St. Louis Zoo, and they decided to check it out. And they saw monkeys there, and they saw how the kids reacted to seeing these monkeys in the zoo. And the legend is that H.P. Wolff turned to the mayor and said, "Jim, Columbus should have something like this." And so nothing happened very quickly. However, in 1926, things did start to happen, and Wolff purchases. Well, let me point out in this slide. You can see this is a Franklin County photo of 1930. You see the O'Shaughnessy Dam, and in the 1920s, okay, and the zoo is born in 1927. Here's that park, that 21.5 acres that will become the Columbus Zoo, and at the time, and now we're at 588 acres, so it's really grown. You see, this is all on the west side of the zoo, leaning into the Olentangy River. But we'll get there in a second here, because what happens is reindeer caused the birth of the zoo. Mr. Wolff decides that he's going to have a Christmas celebration in the city of Columbus, and he brings in 6 reindeer. And they are here for a Christmas celebration. The kids love them. They're held in Franklin Park. And Wolff says to Mayor Thomas, "You know what? I will give you these deer if you build a corral where this Riverside Park is." And that could be the start of a zoo. So the deer were held in Franklin Park. Thomas goes to the city council in late 1926, and he says the city needs a zoo. And because the Dispatch promotion was so successful and people loved the reindeer, the city says, okay, the zoo can be built on 21.5 acres in Riverside Park near the dam. So Wolff donates the reindeer, and in fact, if you go to our North American section today, you'll see we have reindeer on exhibit. Why do we have reindeer on exhibit? They're not related to North America. It's an homage to our heritage. And of course, in North America, we have caribou, which are very similar to reindeer that you find in Europe. So the city agrees to provide animal care, food, veterinary attention. The Dispatch agrees to building this corral. The corral is going to be around 6 acres. And then, of course, the Dispatch, which has been a partner with the zoo since then, erects these 2 tablets announcing the zoo and announcing the Dispatch's involvement. And Wolff goes out on a buying spree, and he picks up some lions from a California farm in 1927, and those lions are held at the Franklin Park Conservatory until a building is built for them. And that's how things go from the late 1920s into the 1930s. So
In 1927, these animals that were held at the Franklin Park Zoo, and I have some pictures that I'll show you because you can still see where they were held, are starting to be brought to the zoo. The zoo is going to only be a facility that's open for the summer. In the winter, the animals have to go somewhere. There are no buildings, climate-controlled buildings for them, so they're going to wind up going to the Franklin Park Conservatory. And a lot of the animals that come in are people's former pets. Even the mayor had a pet monkey that some head of state gave him, and he donated that to the zoo. So in 1927, we have 6 reindeer purchased by the Dispatch. There's Mayor Thomas's monkey, Pedro Miguel. There's another pair of monkeys that we know about. Here's a bear exhibit from the zoo. And you can see somebody is working in with the bears, which we would never do now. Animal care has changed a lot since then. Then here is the zoo entrance around 1930. It was a free zoo, and you didn't have to pay for parking at the time. And now, as I said, we're at 588 acres, so it's really grown. It was first called Riverside Park, and in 1937, it becomes Columbus Municipal Zoo. The people who work there are people who work in sanitation and hydrology. The people who were instrumental in building the dam now have jobs taking care of animals and taking care of grounds at the zoo. So then Wolf, in 1930, he goes to Erie, Pennsylvania. There's an animal park. Now, a lot of these animal parks across the country are people's roadside attractions. They're menageries. A lot of the animals came from other countries that were brought in by ship, and you might have a ship captain who came here to bring goods from another country, but he also, on the side, purchased some animals that he can sell wherever the ports are. So some of those menagerie animals came from there. So Wolf goes to Erie, Pennsylvania. He finds an animal park that's closing. He buys lions, monkeys, tigers, bears, reptiles, and they're all held at the Franklin Park Conservatory, again, until there are buildings erected. In about 1930, the Dispatch and the Ohio State Journal found the Columbus Zoological Society, and non-members are charged 25 cents for parking. By 1932, we have the Dispatch building. It was one of the first buildings built at the zoo. It housed lions and tigers, and later on, instead of lions and tigers, it held great apes. I guess these are 2 shots of the Dispatch building, which no longer exists. It was razed in 1957. In 1935, the Works Progress Administration was formed, and it helped build the roadways and the parkways that got people from the city to the zoo. In 1937, there was a city ordinance saying that Riverside Park would become the Columbus Municipal Zoo. And it's also the first year of a membership drive. The memberships were $2, and businesses were encouraged to give money to purchase animals. 85 businesses stepped up. They gave $10 each, and this was used to help grow the collection. By 1938, membership costs $5 to fund animal building construction. And the Ohio State Journal puts out information asking the public to come and donate materials, donate bricks, donate metal, whatever you can, to help build what people wanted to be a great zoo. And remember, at the time, there was nothing in the charter for the zoo that said, this is going to be an educational institution or a scientific institution or a recreational institution. The purpose of the zoo was not clear in any of those original documents, although it was seen as a city asset, a place where people could go and have recreation and see these animals that they might not see anywhere else and they might hear about or read about. So in 1938, a barn was built, which was later used as a gift shop, and that was, and then it was used to house hoof stock. The dispatch building becomes used for great apes. The first animal building at the zoo was actually the bear house. And then there was a building called the Robert S. Payne Building that was erected for carnivores and monkeys. A large collection of birds came in from the Olentangy Amusement Park, and that was donated to the zoo. Pete the hippo, there he is. He came in 1939. He was the oldest Columbus Zoo animal at the time of his death in 1982. We don't currently have hippos, but maybe someday. And then memberships were lowered to $1 to get more people. And then this doubled when attendance increased from 6,000 people per year to 12,000. This slide here shows a courtyard that you can still see at Franklin Park Zoo, and you can see the bars over the windows. There were animals that were held here during the winter, and then in the spring they would be transported back to the zoo. Not all of the animals transported so easily. There was an escape. The 25 monkeys got out en route and wound up needing to be caught in different areas of the city of Columbus. This was advertised, though, as something that people could do around Christmas time, because for a while the animals in their cages that were built by the dispatch could be viewed in the original Franklin Park Conservatory Palm building that you can see today. And if you'd go in, you would be handed a dispatch kind of guidebook or folio that would list all the animals that you could see. And the zoo was open 6 days a week there. They had one day where it was closed for cleaning. There were cages of birds that were hung from the ceiling. And so people really appreciated having access in the winter. And yeah, there's something about the monkey escape. So now let's talk about the 1940s. So in the 1940s, we have a director. His name is Earl Davis. He was the director from 1943 to 1960. So he put a lot of time into managing this zoo. And one of his famous quotes is, "A zoo director expects to spend an 8-day week on his job." Now, Director Davis was around the time that Kolo the gorilla was born. And I'll talk about that in a minute. If you look at the map, the zoo is, here's what the zoo looks like in the 1940s. And it shows there is a sacred cow pasture, a yacht club, a pony barn, the Carnivora building, the Payne Carnivora building. There's the monkey house. There's the Wagner Mammalia building for heavy animals like elephants and hippos and rhinos. And there's a ruminant barn for antelope and deer. The zoo is still on the west side. We've got king cobras, 2 Asian elephants, 2 South American tapirs, Pete the hippo, of course, 2 reticulated giraffes. And if you look at this photo here, so here's what the zoo looks like. And you can see here, this is the ruminant building, and there are different exhibits that radiate out of that building like a circle. Well, that's based on a zoo in Vienna that was came 2 centuries earlier. And in fact, that particular zoo in Schönbrunn, or near Vienna, used to have botanic gardens surrounding it and between the exhibits. And that's where the term zoological garden comes from. So in the 1940s, it's a tough time for the zoo. It's World War II. And so the zoo staff is cut in half. The people who work at the zoo are being called out and drafted to fight in the war. The people who remain work very, very long hours, and it's very difficult for the zoo to find even enough food to feed the animals at the time. But they managed to get through. Membership dropped. Gas was rationed, so you couldn't get as many people to come out there. So what did the zoo do? The zoo reached out to the community. And in 1944, we have the Zoo Wagon, where Director Davis takes animals out to the schools and other places where the public might be to talk about the zoo and to talk about animals. So he brought the animals out into the community. It was great for education. It was great for public relations. The zoo was struggling financially. Fortunately, an amusement park was built next door. And this was the Gooding Amusement Park, or sometimes it was called Gooding Zoo Park. And so people would come to that, and if they would come to the amusement park, they might also come and visit the zoo. Unfortunately, in 1947, there was a flood in June that swamped the zoo, and it was forced to close for a period of time. Here's a picture of the entrance to the zoo at the time. It was called the Columbus Zoo in the 1940s. There's one of the bird exhibits. A kangaroo house was built in 1940, and here's our current kangaroo walkabout. Very different. Here's the Wagner Building. It was dedicated in 1941, and this is where the large animals were kept. You know, one of the things that was interesting about zoos, particularly at the turn of the century, is not only did they highlight animals, but they also highlighted different groups of people, people that the average city dweller may not meet. So at the Columbus Zoo in 1940, there was a Hopi chief named Eagle Plume who had a Winnebago wife. Her name was Lone Deer. And of course, these were different names in the Winnebago language or the Hopi language. And the dispatch announced their arrival. They had a papoose called Good Corn Harvest. And these three individuals spent the summer at the zoo. This was a big deal. People came to the Olentangy River to greet them because this Indian family, Native American family, came down the Olentangy in a canoe. There was a lot of celebration. The person who was the director of Campfire Girls for Franklin County and Columbus went and greeted them and gave them some craft made of leather as a token of friendship. People could come and speak to the chief and his wife about anything Indian related because they were going to stay at the zoo for the summer. They did bead work, they did silver work. He sang songs, he talked about Indian traditions. And of course, you know, people had heard about the Old West, they'd read about it, but most of them hadn't met any Indians, and most of the Indians that were in Ohio at the time had been pushed into reservations out of state. So this was an educational experience for people, and most of them didn't realize that Eagle Plume was Yale educated. So not only that, the zoo got its first elephant handler, somebody who really specialized in elephants, and his name was Harry Parkhurst. He was 77 years old. He was here particularly to manage the two bull Asian elephants, young Asian elephants that we had, and he came with lots of circus experience. He was at the Ringling Show, the Wallace Show, the Sells Floto Show, so many different circuses, and he kept trying to get out of the business. He kept getting brought back in, and here he was, someone who spent a lot of his time in Columbus, and he's going to work with these elephants. And this just shows you, you know, when people think about circuses, they don't realize that circuses and zoos were very tightly interwoven, especially in the early part of the 1900s. A lot of zoos would get animals that were retired from the circus, or they would get staff, veterinarians, animal care people who had experience with these exotic animals. Otherwise, you might get people who have experience with livestock, which is very good, and you'd get livestock veterinarians, but wouldn't it be great if you had people who knew something about managing lions and tigers and kangaroos and other animals that were in these traveling shows? So there was a lot of exchange between zoos and circuses at the time. So here, that's just one example. In the 1950s, we've got a new elephant house and yard. And for those of you who know our herd, the elephant building, or the pachyderm building, has changed quite a bit over the years. In 1975, we got a 3.1 acre habitat. It was expanded in '98, and the yard's renovated in 2019, and we're talking about doing even more here because our herd is growing. Now we have 6 elephants in our herd, with last year's birth of Frankie, who's doing very well, by the way. So we are a leading institution on Asian elephants right now, and we do a lot of Asian elephant conservation as well. We also do a lot in Asian elephant animal welfare. It's very important to us, so I just throw that in there to show you where we are with Asian elephants now. The 1950s. The city of Columbus assumes operation of the zoo, and employees become civil servants of the city of Columbus. 52 acres of land was purchased east of Route 257, which is Riverside Drive, and it's purchased from the Stanberry Estate. Now the zoo will have an east and a west section. You know, when you go to the zoo, you cross through a tunnel to go to either of those sections. The old section is where the reptile building is, near the river. The Columbus Zoo opened a barn in 1953. Let's see, we charge 10 cents for parking. The Arthur C. Johnson Aquarium opens. Okay, we're not officially Columbus Zoo and Aquarium, but now we have an aquarium. And it's the first city-owned zoo building. Arthur C. Johnson was the editor-in-chief at the Dispatch, and he was a real proponent for the zoo. He was a great fundraiser and philanthropist for the zoo. So now the zoo is 91.5 acres. In 1954, we get the Zoo Zephyr. Now, this is the point of the talk where usually the people who are with me say, "Oh, I remember that." And now we get into that part where, "Oh, yeah, I remember that animal or that exhibit or that director," and all of that, because people really feel ownership, and they should, of the Columbus Zoo. It's such a part of the community. So we had the Zephyr at the time. Now we still have a tram that goes around the North America region. 2 stations are built, and very importantly, we acquire our first 3 gorillas. And 2 of them were Millie Christina and Macombo. They have an important role in putting the Columbus Zoo on the map. So speaking of map, in the 1950s, here's a guidebook from 1953. We have well, the guidebook says we have 8 drinking fountains. We have a train, a boathouse, a boating pier, elk, zebu, which is a type of cattle, deer, zebra, hoofstock, monkey island, bear pits, the old bear exhibits. You would look down to see the bears. Hippo, rhino, pheasant cage, hospital, wolves, coyotes, foxes, aquarium filtration plant, owl house, snake house, apes, elephant house, and lions. All of that's mentioned in the guidebook. So a lot of new buildings. Here's a few of them. There's the birdhouse from 1950, the snake house from 1952, the giraffe house in 1953. But what really put the zoo on the map was this, the birth of Colo. Now, at the time, gorillas were captured from the wild, and in areas like where today you would find Rwanda or Uganda or the Democratic Republic of Congo. Africa was still being explored, and its wildlife resources were available for those who could afford to buy them. And gorillas were one of those mysterious animals that people didn't see very often, and they didn't survive very long at zoos. People didn't know what the appropriate diet was for a gorilla, and even one of the pioneer directors, a director of the Bronx Zoo, William Temple Hornaday, said he doubts that gorillas will survive past 3 months at any zoo. Well, the gorillas that we had did very well. And there was a director, or not a director, a veterinarian named Warren Thomas, who, against Earl Davis's wishes, Thomas allowed the two gorillas to get together. Thomas was working late at night, and he noticed a brown sack lying on the floor of this exhibit, and there was baby Colo. And I believe he had to get Colo to start breathing on her own, which she did. It didn't take much. And then he called Earl Davis, and suddenly this became a really big news story. And you can see in the picture, there's Colo in her little box. And she was raised for a while by human surrogates, right? And almost raised like a child for a while. And she became a zoo favorite. And, you know, New York Times ran daily updates. Clark Gable, who was an Ohioan, donated money for a contest where people would provide funds for a new nursery to be built. So the Columbus Zoo made its first appearance on the Today Show with baby Colo. Suddenly everybody wants to come to the Columbus Zoo. They all want to see this baby gorilla. It was, I made a mistake. Gable gave $100 to add to the $25 prize in the Columbus Citizens Name the Baby Gorilla contest. Okay? And that was advertised also in the New York Times. So in the next year, 1957, 1 million visitors came to the zoo, which was huge. Our record, I think, is about 2.5 million visitors, which is great for any zoo, even today. But in 1956, this was a big deal. The Columbus City Council authorized an $11,000 gorilla nursery. And we got recognition through what's now the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. It was the American Association of Zoological Parks and Aquariums. Their highest honor was the Edward Bean Award, the Edward H. Bean Award, and the very first one went to the Columbus Zoo. It says, given in recognition for the most notable birth, the first captive-born lowland gorilla. And since then, we've gotten other Bean Awards for other species that we've worked on. Well, here's Director Davis, and in 1958, we get another gorilla. His name is Bongo. And the idea was maybe Bongo would breed Colo. But first, we wanted Colo to act more of as a gorilla and less of a person. I mean, Colo, even till her last years, she still liked to wear hats, human ball caps. She still liked to have her nails painted, things like that. And so she was introduced to Bongo, they got along well, and she started her own family. Bongo came in when he was 14 months old, and the zoo was recognized with another Bean Award for the second generation birth. In 1959, we have a public address system installed. A conservatory-like exhibit for birds was created. The old office building became the veterinarian's office in the hospital, and the bear pits became barless. Here's what the zoo looked like in 1955, and you can see on the right, that newly acquired land is mostly parking lot. And so the old parking lot could become exhibit area. And then you see at the bottom there's the O'Shaughnessy Dam along the Olentangy. In the 1960s, we have a new director. His name is James Savoy. He's a young OSU graduate, and he's got a veterinary medical degree. He was the director from 1963 to 67. He went on to direct the Detroit Zoo and the Phoenix Zoo. And there's a picture of him here. And this is the first time the zoo starts to be open during the weekends in the winter. We have a reptile building. Now, the reptile building is the oldest existing building in the zoo. We had an amazing collection. We still have an amazing collection. We're working with species that some of which are extinct in the wild. So in the 1960s, we have this new director. The reptile building is what I started to talk about. It was novel because the working area is in the very center of the building, and that's the off-exhibit area. And then, like a donut, the exhibits are wrapped around that, and then a second circle would be the public walkway. So this building opened in 1967. It's been renovated quite a few times since then, especially in 1998 and 2004. Then we had the Carnivora building was completed and the big cats moved into it. The old bear cages became sea lion exhibits. The penguin exhibit was added to the aquarium and 3 tanks were set up for sea turtles and electric eels and freshwater fish. So we're still doing aquarium work. And then north of the grounds, the zoo with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and we still work with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, established a facility north of the zoo for propagation of waterfowl, for our waterfowl hunters. The Children's Zoo was built, and we had a TV program, as well as something called talking storybooks, which are little machines where you stick it's like a flat elephant whose trunk, plastic elephant whose trunk is a key, and you stick that in and you turn it, and you could hear somebody talking about whatever species you're looking at. In 1963, we do have an escape. 17 African sheep get out, wild sheep, all but one were recovered. 20 penguins got out. Somebody left the door open, and the penguins made their way to the river. It took a while for the animal care staff to get out on boats and bring them back in, but they were all recovered. Then in 1968, we have Kolo's first offspring, the first second-generation gorilla birth in human care, and we got an award for that. And we also had a groundbreaking children's zoo that was established. Now we're in the 1970s. The 1970s, we have it's more like a pontoon boat, but it was a steamboat, the Scioto Belle. And you know what? I think I'm saying Olentangy when I should be saying Scioto for the river. Yeah. You know, so that's a mistake. My apologies for that. So the Scioto Belle, and it used to give voyages over near the dam. We had our first employee strike. The Docent Association was formed. They just celebrated 50 years, and boy, we have so many volunteers and docents. We couldn't do our work without the volunteers and docents who really communicate our story to the guests that we have. We had our first Zoofari fundraiser. We established an education department. We had an adopt an animal program, so that helped build revenue. We were run by the Columbus Zoological Park Association, which became a tax-exempt nonprofit organization, which the Columbus Zoo is now. There's an association board of trustees that comes with a governing council and representatives of elected officials, representatives of the community from Franklin County, from Columbus. The city continues to own the land and the buildings and to provide funds through bond issues. Now, most of our visitors come from Franklin County, and Franklin County's been very generous with the levies that have come up over the years to support the zoo. And in the 1970s, the zoo membership is $10. Attendance declined in the 1970s. We had a string of directors, some only spent a year with the zoo. But one thing changed that, and that was this guy, Jack Hanna. So, Jack came in. He was under Mel Dodge's administration. He was a 31-year-old zookeeper from Tennessee who managed a small Central Florida zoo. He was educated at Muskingum, and he was interested in the director position. So Jack comes in and campaigns for a new Columbus Zoo. And if you know Jack, you know his charisma. And he used to take animals from the zoo, and he would just walk into municipal buildings carrying these animals with him. He even went in with a bald eagle at one time. And when you do that, these ambassador animals, people listen when they can get that close to these animals that Jack was bringing in. And even at night, Jack and Susie would walk around the zoo. They'd clean it up. They'd pick up litter in the evenings when the zoo was closed. They did a lot of plantings to make it more like a botanic garden, and lots of community activities. So people they loved Jack. And Jack was also one of the people who was responsible for suddenly making what used to be cages more habitats with natural rock work and more vegetation. During Jack's tenure, the gorillas got an outdoor play area. The COTA bus trips started coming back and forth from Columbus, so it was easier for people to get to the zoo. We had a waterfall and a footbridge near the entrance, and zoo attendance went up from 358,000 people in 1978 to 601,000 people in 1980. So it was a 68% increase. So Jack was the director till 1992. In 1979, the first cheetahs are born at the zoo. We've had over 25 cheetahs born since then. We play a very significant role in cheetah conservation. And as you might know, we made history in 2020 when we had the first in vitro cheetah cubs. Here's what the zoo looked like in 1976. You can see some development to the right of Riverside Drive. There's the Scioto River on the left. The zoo is expanding. It's becoming more popular. We had the first third-generation gorilla born in 1979, and by now we're known for our gorilla care, and our keepers and docents have developed such expertise in the surrogacy program that zoos worldwide are asking for help, and they're developing manuals, and they're helping these gorilla populations so that we don't need to import wild gorillas anymore. Now we can focus on sustaining the populations that we have in human care and investing in conservation of gorillas throughout Central Africa. In the 1980s, we are accredited for the first time by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. We purchased 37 acres that become Wyandotte Lake. Wyandotte Lake is the amusement park that becomes Zoombezi Bay eventually. And we also opened Jungle Jack's Landing. And the zoo is growing quickly. And we're making infrastructure and mass transit improvements for guests with special needs. The new amusement park is 37 acres. It's leased to an organization called Funtime Incorporated, which created Wyandotte Lake. In '82, we've got a new amphibian building, which is expanded to house the Aldabra tortoises that we have. We have the seal exhibit now becomes a penguin exhibit. And the giraffe building becomes the Exploration Center for Ohio. Lots of change. We have our first gorilla twins, Makambo and Masuba, and they're the first twins in the Western Hemisphere. Jack makes his first appearance on Good Morning America. His TV career is launched. He becomes very, very busy promoting the zoo, promoting conservation. Nationally, he gets 5 Emmy Awards during his career. Diane Fossey, if you know Diane Fossey from Gorillas in the Mist, she comes and visits the zoo. She bonds with the gorillas and the keepers. And one of those keepers is Charlene Gendry. And Charlene, with 3 zoo docents, sits around at a bar and they come up with a plan to help gorillas in Central Africa. That plan would become Partners in Conservation, which just celebrated 30 years of being active in Rwanda, Uganda, and Democratic Republic of Congo, where we're working not only with those who conserve gorillas in the field, but also the schools and cooperatives and people who make a living in those areas, and people who've survived the terrible genocide in 1994. So this is one of our longest conservation programs, and it's still ongoing. We know people there by generations. We built this gorilla habitat here on the right based on what John Aspinall was doing at the time. He was a millionaire who came up with this idea, and there he is on the right. It didn't really look like gorilla habitat aesthetically, but it had so much enrichment, so much for the gorillas to do, to climb through, to climb over. This exhibit was ahead of its time when it was built. So there's Diane Fossey with Charlene Gendry on the right. And then big change happened with when Jerry Boren came on board. Boren came on as the zoo's general manager. He had degrees from OSU in history, and his master's was in public administration. He wasn't a zoo man. He was interested in helping the zoo, though, because it was clear that Jack had so much going on with the media at the time that we really needed a general manager. And Jerry came on board. He worked for Mel Dodge in the Columbus Recreation and Parks Department, and he became the executive director in 1992 when Jack became director emeritus. So Jerry served for 23 years. He retired in 2008, and as many of us know, Jerry came back in 2021. He came out of retirement. Wouldn't even take a paycheck. That's how much he loves the Columbus Zoo. And we were so fortunate to have him with us. So under his leadership, Jerry quadrupled the size of the zoo. That 588 acres that we have now, that's Jerry, working, of course, with partners. When Jerry came in, the zoo was 128 acres. And here's some information about Jack and his career, speaking on behalf of the zoo and wildlife worldwide, and there's some of his trophies. And there's his book, Monkeys on the Interstate. We became the fastest growing zoo in the country with attendance up 68% since 1978. We opened a new amphitheater, a riverfront amphitheater. We developed our first geographic themed area, and that's our North America region. And the reason we could do that was because Jerry and Jack were able to purchase 265 acres from Franklin County. Some of that land was used to build the North America region of the zoo. One of the nice things about the acquisitions that Jack and Jerry were able to make is if you go around the country and you look at municipal zoos, they're kind of restricted. They grew up in maybe a suburban area of the city, but then the city grew around them. And so they have no place to expand. Jack and Jerry had the forethought to say, hey, this is a hot area, there's going to be a lot of development here. If we don't want to be locked into our existing footprint, now is the time to start purchasing land. And of course, one of the big purchases was the Rearview Golf Club across the street from the zoo, which became Safari Golf, which, by the way, is also an Audubon cooperative sanctuary. So they're doing a lot of conservation out there. Only 2% of golf clubs in the world have that kind of certification. So we're all about conservation. 1987, we get a new polar bear exhibit with waterfalls and new pools. And you can see the polar bear exhibits have been renovated a few times, with our biggest and newest in 2014. And this is still one of the best polar bear exhibits in the world. We've had polar bear births there. We contribute to polar bear conservation through the facilities that this polar bear exhibit provides. For example, we monitor denning behavior of our females when they're pregnant through the winter, and we record those behaviors and we share it with researchers worldwide, including those who are in the Arctic who want to know, what do polar bears do under the ice through the winter? That's kind of been a black hole for researchers, but this kind of gives us a window into it. And very recently we tested a new tracking technology on one of our polar bears, Kulu, who is wearing a dummy transmitter made by 3M to determine whether or not these new tracking devices will work on polar bears in the wild as an alternative to things like collars or ear tags. So, and it's held on by Velcro. Lots of things going on. We have our first wild lights in 1988. It was called Wild Lights Wonderland. And boy, that's really been amazing for the zoo. And coming out of the pandemic in 2020, we were slammed by people in the area who wanted to come to see wild lights. They felt safe there. They got people out of their homes where they could enjoy something for the holidays. And wild lights is always very popular, and every year we do it bigger and we get bigger crowds. We start a conservation program formally in 1992. We support projects worldwide, and this year we're supporting 77 conservation projects in over 24 countries. A big part of what Columbus Zoo does is we walk the talk. We support wildlife conservation and people who live with wildlife around the world, here in Columbus, nationally, and have an excellent track record for them. Here's Jerry when he becomes the CEO. We open a new moose exhibit. We are the first zoo in the lower 48 to exhibit moose. All of the moose that we get are animals that are rescues. And as you walk through the North America region, you'll notice that many of the animals that you'll see there are animals that have been abandoned by parents or were rescued from fires, things like that. All the birds in our North American aviary, for example, are animals that can't be released. These are rescues. Some of them went to the Ohio Wildlife Center. We opened up the Australian walkabout. In 1992, we get giant pandas, and the pandas stay for the summer. They come from China. Jack becomes the director emeritus, and the zoo becomes one of 4 zoos to have bonobos. And another piece of bonobo or zoo history is the bonobo Unga, who was mentioned in a play that was just here in Columbus called Come From Away, because Unga was on a plane coming to New York, I think, and then Columbus from a European zoo, and that plane was grounded on 9/11. And the people of, I don't remember if it's Switzerland or Finland or Greenland. Anyway, the local people came out to help care for this bonobo before that plane was able to finally make the end of its journey. Unga recently passed away, but Unga certainly was our connection to that terrible time and was just a wonderful bonobo here at the zoo. Lived a good life here. And by the way, bonobos are not chimpanzees. I'll just add that, and are very, very rare. They're close. They're the animal with the closest genetics to humans. Okay, 1993, we opened Discovery Reef. We have a new touch pool. We open up a wetlands exhibit with the help of Ohio Department of Natural Resources. We have a diving plan, diving program. Lots of new things are happening in the 90s. Discovery Reef is built with an 85,000 gallon saltwater aquarium, and you can see that today. It's an authentic representation of a coral reef from the Indian Ocean. And, you know, one of the things that we're doing there is we're helping conservation of zebra sharks. We're doing coral conservation. There's a disease now that's getting through the Caribbean and southern Florida called stony coral tissue loss disease. We are holding some healthy mound corals behind the scenes in that building as part of an assurance population. These corals came from the state of Florida. They gave them to us to hold, to possibly breed, and to introduce back into the waters of Florida when the time comes that the disease is under control. So there's a lot of conservation going on in every region of the zoo. This is what the zoo looks like in 1996. You can see there's a lot more development on the right. Over here is what's now Jerry Bohr and Trace. There's our business office. This area becomes the Heart of Africa region. The Heart of Africa region is here. This is North America. We haven't purchased this land yet. This is the pachyderm building, that's the pachyderm building. Here's the aquarium over here. There's that reptile building. Here is Wyandotte Lake that becomes Zambezi Bay. We're still not called Columbus Zoo and Aquarium until this happens. In 1999, we built Manatee Coast. And now with the aquarium building, with Manatee Coast, and now even with Adventure Cove, we are truly an aquarium. And we are one of only 2 zoos north of Florida to participate in the Manatee Rescue, Rehab, and Release program. We do this with partners, and we are a facility that holds manatees that are typically young orphans. You know, so many manatees are hit by boat strikes or there's disease, there's seagrass die-off going on in Florida right now, so manatees are malnourished. Many of them that can be turned over fairly rapidly and back into the Florida waters are held by SeaWorld or Tampa Zoo and Lowry Park and those partners. But we commit to holding these orphans for what could be months or years. In fact, right now we have 9 manatees, which is more than we've ever had. 4 just came in, and you can see them at Manatee Coast. So we're playing a role in manatee conservation, and in fact we're also supporting manatee projects in other parts of the world. Comet was our first manatee to be released in 2000. And you can see on the right, that's one of the manatees that was released. We track these animals once they're released. They usually come from Columbus to a facility in Florida for staging. And then when the time is right, they're released with a transmitter. That's what's sticking up out of, here's the tail of the manatee, there's the paddle, and here's the transmitter that breaks off on its own, but it allows us to monitor the manatee for a year just to see how well they do. In the 2000s, we've got a new carousel, which is the restored carousel from Olentangy Park. Columbus Zoo celebrates our 75th anniversary. We have the new islands of Southeast Asia and Voyage to Australia that open up. The voyage to Australia becomes the Roadhouse, which is our nocturnal building. We open up the My Barn area, the My House area, which is made of sustainable materials like the cafeteria trays that children use in elementary schools. There's a lot of things going on in the 2000s. In 2006, the Ohio Department of Transportation and the zoo exchanged real estate to relocate SR 750, and now we have Jerry Boren Trace so that Powell Road doesn't cut through the zoo. So that was rerouted. In 2010, ODOT exchanges the Wyandotte Inn property to the city of Columbus. It's a half acre, and that helps bring us up to the 588 acres that are owned by the city of Columbus, Franklin County Board of Commissioners, and operated by the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium. We still have 135 acres that aren't developed. If you go behind the business office, behind Heart of Africa, there's a forest, there's a meadow. It's very beautiful. It joins the community on the other side that's not developed and available for expansion. So the next big step that the zoo did was purchase the wilds. And there were a number of institutions that owned the wilds when it was transferred to us, and I can't remember if it was from, I'm probably mistaken, it might have come from AEP, but it was nearly 10,000 acres of formerly surface mined land. And there was an effort to reclaim that land, and for 2,000 acres of it or so to have a conservation breeding facility. And if you visit the wilds now, you know it's much more than that. It's now a center for science and for tourism, and you can go on vehicles and see animals, some of which are no longer in the wild, like the Pear David's deer. We've had animals that were bred at the wilds, like the scimitar horned oryx, which was extinct in the wild, is slowly being reintroduced. And we provided animals that were reintroduced in the country of Chad. It's a desert antelope. We are breeding and releasing the first endangered invertebrate to be listed federally, and that's the American burying beetle. And so we're doing that at the wilds. We're doing a lot of restoration ecology. Places around the country are looking at the wilds as a model. How can you restore this formerly mined land? What will grow there? How do you restore a prairie? How do you restore a forest? So these are the kinds of things that are going on there. And then, it was Jerry Boren and partners who decided, when other zoos said, we're not going to invest in the wilds, Jerry said, Columbus Zoo is on it. And that's why the wilds is part of what we're calling now our family of parks. It's its own institution. It's got its own AZA accreditation. We partner very closely on conservation and financial management, but it's its own center, just like Zambezi Bay and Safari Golf are their own centers, all in the Columbus Zoo family of parks. So our first Asian elephant born at the zoo was in 2004, and that's Bodhi. We opened up the Water's Edge area, which is where a lot of our events are. And as long as I'm talking about events, little side note, a lot of our events now are zero waste. We can have really big events and come out with just one bag of trash to go to the landfill, because we're working very, very hard to use as much sustainability or green practices as we can. Asia Quest opens, we get our first Amur tigers. Zambezi Bay opens. Polar Frontier opens, and if you go to Polar Frontier, one of the big themes is climate change, and it was kind of ahead of its time in terms of talking about climate change, because in 2010 not everybody agreed that it was happening, much less how do we message this, because a lot of us have a stake in what happens due to climate change. And so now, of course, we do a lot of messaging with climate change. We certainly hear from partners whose island homes are underwater because of climate change, or people who are seeing more fires or fire seasons that have extended because of changes that are happening now. We brought in Hank, who at the time was the largest Asian elephant in North America. Stingray Bay opened, and it was seasonal at the time, and now we've done some renovations, so you can go see Stingray Bay anytime you want. You can go and feed the rays. And we brought in Nanook, the male polar bear. Zoos don't have a great track record with breeding polar bears, but Nanook was a very good breeder. Okay, and so we got cubs through him. He weighed 1,000 pounds, and he was the father to all of our polar bear cubs. He passed away in 2017 at the age of 29, which is far higher than the average polar bear life expectancy. In 2003, here's something you might not know. Across the river, across the Scioto River from the zoo, there's a little white building that we have rented for $1 a year. It's the Jeffries Mining Foreman's Club building. And that building is where we have a freshwater mussel facility. And there are more species of freshwater mussels between here and the Atlantic than anywhere else in the world. And the mussels, freshwater mussels in Ohio, are dying. I mean, there are a lot of threatened and endangered species. So we work with ODNR and the Ohio State University, and we have this facility where we're learning all about freshwater mussels. We are doing in vitro production of freshwater mussels now. In some instances, we're taking them back out into the rivers to restore them. That's certainly our goal. So I always tell people that if you look at all the tiny mussels that we have, the Glaucidia, we probably have more animals in that little building than we have in the zoo and the wilds combined. So that is another big conservation effort from the zoo. And I always offer to pay the $1 a year lease, but I in case it gets cut from the budget, we'll still be able to afford that. We have a curator of, our vice president of animal care, Doug Wormholtz, who's been with that program since the beginning, and I told him, I'll give you 20 years of lease money. Tom Stolf was our president and CEO starting in 2013, and he was until 2021. And it was during his tenure that we opened the Heart of Africa. And Heart of Africa, as you know, has a 43-acre or so African savanna. We have a LEED certified restaurant there, and it's where everything is recyclable or compostable. On top of that restaurant, we have a tracking station for birds called MODIS. So we participate in an international network there. So that was a really important event. We're certainly known for that Heart of Africa themed area. Here's our first wombat. He came in 2014. His name is Glenn. Not many zoos have wombats. One of the things wombats are known for is that their feces are shaped like cubes. And they do that because they use that to mark their territory. They live in very rocky desert areas, and so a cube doesn't roll. Okay. Here's Heart of Africa. We have a wonderful giraffe population that's out there, and we've had a number of giraffe calves born out there. Most of the animals that we have are tied to some conservation project or initiative, in the range countries. It's more than 20 species of animals there. It was the first LEED building at the LEED certified building. We now have 3 restaurants that are LEED certified and part of the Green Restaurant Association. There's baby Nora. This was a polar bear that needed to be pulled because she wasn't being reared by her mom, and we raised her, and she is doing so well. I think she's at the Utah Zoo now, Utah's Hogle Zoo, and they just love her, and she made big news when she was born. And a lot of these animals, you know, are moved because the Association of Zoos and Aquariums have plans for them. We manage these animals genetically, and that's through a program called the Species Survival Plan, or SSP. So many of our animals move from facility to facility for that purpose, to help us sustain these populations so we can have them both in zoos and in some instances to have the genetic diversity that we need for reintroductions in the range countries. When we needed a name for Nora, we had a naming contest. There were 88,000 entries. They came from 115 countries. Now we're getting to some really recent times. We have more employees, 340 employees in 2016, or year-round employees. We've got over 2,000 seasonal members, and if you know anybody who wants a job at the zoo, we have plenty of jobs available now. We're hiring. We're looking for people in food, beverage, retail, rides. Just go to the Columbus Zoo website. It's a great place to be. In 2016, the Conservation Department was established, and the zoo, for the very first time, included a Vice President of Conservation position as a reflection of where the zoo was heading regarding conservation. And I was fortunate to be selected for that. We also opened a 4D theater and the Shores Play Park. And the play park, by the way, for the Shores is where the Johnson Center used to be, which was a former aquarium, and it had penguins and sea turtles and things like that. That was knocked down, and the Shores Play Park is there now, and it's very popular. So sadly, in 2017, we lost Colo. That was a big hit, not just for those who worked with her and knew her very well, but the community. A lot of outpouring when Colo passed away. She had a heart attack, and I think she was in her 60s. Yeah, she had just turned 60 when she passed away, which is extraordinary for a gorilla. This is what the zoo looked like in 2017. Some people know us from a show called Secrets of the Zoo, which is now streaming on the Disney Channel, but it was a Nat Geo show. They recorded 3 seasons. I think 2 seasons have aired, and 1 is going to go on fairly soon. It's all about our animal care, and you'll get to see people that still work at the zoo in the wilds. And I can't tell you how many times kids have asked me, is Dr. Priya working today? You know, they just really love the folks that are at the zoo. And in fact, Jan Raymer, who used to be the vice president at the Wilds and is now the senior vice president for animal care, conservation, and education at the zoo, when she walks around on grounds, people want to take pictures with her because they recognize her from Secrets at the Zoo. And it's great because now people see the zoo and the wilds as a destination where they may or may not have come from out of state to visit Columbus in the past, but now they know, hey, there's this great zoo and this facility called the Wilds. We work with many, many partners worldwide, and that's its own discussion. Here's a picture of the work that we're doing with the Florida Reef Tract, and those are mound corals. And mound corals people have not had in human care, but we have expertise with staghorn corals and branching corals, and we're trying our hand here. And this guy, Ramon Villaverde, who's a keeper over at the Shores region, is somebody that people around the country use for his expertise in managing corals. So we're having some success. You can see the coral in the top left is white. That is a dead coral from the reef that has this disease. Here is, I mentioned the mussel facility, and there it is. And the person at the bottom is another keeper, that's Tara Archer, also from the Shores region, and she has for years been working on restoration of the plains garter snake. And she's been breeding them, and she goes out into the field. That is an Ohio threatened species. That guy on the top, that's Tom Waters from the Ohio State University, who used to, well, he's recently passed away, but he really led this effort to get the mussel facility established. We've been doing work with hellbenders for many years. Some people call them snot otters. They are very, very rare, especially in Ohio and West Virginia. We take these, we take eggs from some of the creeks in eastern Ohio, bring them into human care, and then another keeper, Pete Johansson, will rear these, and when the time is right, when the animals are about 3 years, we take them back to the creeks and we release them, and we tag them so we can monitor them. Over 1,000 of these hellbenders have been released. From the zoo, the hellbenders go to Ohio. From the wilds, they go to West Virginia. So another great conservation program that's been going on for many years. 2020, Adventure Cove opens. This is the first exhibit that has not only underwater viewing, but that uses this curved pathway structure that also has a flat roof so that the sea lions can sit above you and you can look up and see the sea lions and the harbor seals. We have Jack Hanna's Animal Encounters Village now, which is really nice. The exhibits are made so that we can move animals around. So it's all for enrichment. The animals get to see new areas, novel areas, and experience them. Some of the animals, our goal is to have some of them come out and walk around the shelving areas and on ropes and so forth above people's heads. So this is a really great place to see ambassador animals. And next to it is our Stingray Bay, which, as I said, is now open year-round. So the zoo is mostly a spring and summer and maybe fall kind of zoo. But now with this Adventure Cove area, there are things to visit all year round. You can hear the sea lions from the parking lot. I just wanted to point out, we mentioned sustainability a few times. The zoo is heading in that direction. We're looking at alternate forms of energy, for example. Here's our new Susie Edwards Conservation Education Building. It was built in 2020, and that's 165 solar panels on the roof. We are 588 acres owned by the City of Columbus, Franklin County Board of Commissioners, and operated by the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium. Lots of things have happened, even in recent history. You can check out the dispatch for that. But I will say that we've come out so strong, and the community has really supported us. We had one of our highest attendance levels last year. Our education programs are nearly fully booked, if not fully booked. Conservation is moving straight ahead. Jerry has helped us through some difficult times, but we've got new policies in place, new people in place, we're restructured, and we got this guy. So this is our new director. He's our new president and CEO. His name is Tom Schmid. Tom comes to us from the Texas State Aquarium. He has made conservation one of his top priorities. He's getting to know people from the different businesses and municipalities that support the zoo, and we're really looking forward to what comes next. Tom's got some big ideas. We're doing a lot of strategic planning. And all this to say is that in 2027, we will be celebrating 100 years. It's been an incredible ride, and so many people have contributed to the history of the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium. So with that, I thank you for your time. Thanks for having me. Feel free to contact the zoo or reach out to me or anyone else if you're interested, or if you have anything historical that we might want to include in our own archives. The story keeps growing as more people contribute to it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. This was very interesting.
Thank you.
I knew the zoo was involved in a lot of things, but this is beyond. I'm familiar with Partners in Conservation, being part of a garden club that supports that.
Worthington?
Yeah, Worthington.
Oh, of course, they're great.
Yeah, it's one of the major projects. I've met Charlene and
Yeah.
heard all about the. Where is it in Africa?
Well, most of the work is in Rwanda. Well, thank you for having me. I hope
Yeah.
people will find this
So
informative.
interesting. It says you were one of the largest in the United States. Who's ahead of us? I can't imagine anybody ahead.
Well, if you look at San Diego,
Oh,
it's
okay.
the zoo and the wild animal park,
Okay.
which is huge.
Okay.
Well,
And then if you look at the Wildlife Conservation Society, they've got Bronx Zoo, they've got the Prospect Park Zoo, Queens Zoo, the aquarium in Brooklyn. Yeah.
so my dad is from Brooklyn.
Okay.
Well, I
I
thought
used to be a
maybe
keeper at the Bronx Zoo.
I thought maybe this was timely when I heard about your program for Delaware County. I thought, well, maybe it was good to have some good PR
Oh, yeah.
at a time. And I know Jerry Bourne's wife real well. She's in the
Oh,
Powell
Lois.
Garden Club.
Yeah, Lois is great.
Yeah.
We've had some really great people. And the thing about history is we have to look at it through the eyes of people who were there at the time, instead of saying, wow, they shouldn't have done that, or they shouldn't have managed elephants a certain way. And there are people today who, even in the zoo, who are somewhat critical when we show a historic picture that shows an animal in a cage. We're sensitive to that now,
Yeah,
but that's how it was done at the time.
sure.